Well, hello and welcome to the P&F Presents Leadership. I'd like to welcome you all to online again. My name is Helen Carson and I'm the P&F President for St Andrews. We've got a great lineup for you tonight. We've got 4 presenters. We've got Dr John Collier, Dr Julie McGonigle, Mr John Chapman and Harry Carson. And Lynn Jarvis, who is our Head of Community Engagement. She will give us a good introduction onto all our presenters shortly. I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us. Here at the P&F, we are trying very hard to keep you all connected in this very strange time. Obviously, we're not allowed to meet in person, so we just would like to thank you for joining us. We have tried to do a number of things through the P&F in this strange time. We're meeting via Zoom with the P&F exec. I'm trying to think of ways to keep you all connected. We did a great trivia, thanks to Lynn Jarvis, on Friday night, which was lots of fun. We also were able, actually, a few of us were able to go into school last term and help out at the gala day, a handful of us. We were able to volunteer at the barbecue, so that was a good success. And thanks to the school for letting it go ahead, all went very successful. And the last thing we were able to do was for Grandparents' Day. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to meet in person with all our lovely grandparents. But Lynn and her team was able to organise some great fridge magnets which were sent home. So we all hope you were able to pass on those to the grandparents. So that's a little bit of what the P&F were doing. And we'll get on with the main part of the evening, which is the P&F Presents. So I'll hand over to Lynn, who's going to be our moderator for the evening, and she can explain how things are going to run for the evening. So thanks, Lynn.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm here in the council room with Dr Collier. So I'll just explain a little bit about how the evening's going to proceed. We have our 4 presenters. They're going to present pretty much straight after each other. If you've had any questions, you can add them into the chat section on your live event there. There's a Q&A section. You just click on the little bit with the question mark and you can add your questions. After the 4 presentations, we will then go through those questions with you and throw them to whichever panellist we feel will be most able to help. So you can keep adding questions the whole way through. You've also got the ability to like a question. So if there's a question that you see that comes up that you would have asked yourself or you think is a particularly good question, then it's a great idea if you sort of pass that like that one, because then we'll know that's one's of interest and spend a bit more time. So before we get started, though, we would like to start with acknowledgement of country. So I'm going to introduce to you Harry Carson. So Harry Carson is our outgoing school captain. So he finished up, his last day was the last day of term 2. And I've known Harry mostly, I think, initially through Startup. He was the first winner of our Startup program. And I've had a great privilege of working with him as school captain over the last year. It's been a bit tricky this year. So he's going to be one of our panellists tonight who's going to give us a bit of a student leadership point of view, and he's going to start the evening now just with acknowledgement of country. Thanks, Harry.
I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection with the land, waters and community. I acknowledge that St Andrews Cathedral School, where we learn and where we meet, is part of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose saltwater and sandstone people. I pay my respects to their cultures and to the elders both past, present and emerging.
Okay, thank you, Harry. We're just going to have our opening prayer now, and Dr McGonigle has joined us all the way from England. So we will give her a proper introduction in a moment when she's one of our panellists, but for now I'd like to invite Dr McGonigle to say our opening prayer, please.
Evening, everyone. Real pleasure to be with you this evening, and I hope you enjoy the event. As Lynn has just said, I am beaming in from an oddly warm UK this evening, and in a moment I'm going to pray particularly pray for protection for students, parents and staff in this, what Helen has already said is a very odd time of life. I'm not sure how lockdown has been for you. It was summed up for me the other day when I knelt down to tie my son's shoelace, and he just gently rubbed me on the head like this and said, I think, Mummy, you need to keep putting the brown stuff on. So that pretty much summed it up. Much more grey hair, and your children, well, my children, much too close for comfort. So let's just pray for this period of time. Heavenly Father, we thank you for St Andrew's Cathedral School. We thank you for all of the families that are connected with that school, both present and past. And we pray, particularly at this moment, for protection on students, parents and staff, for their health, for their jobs and for their well-being, that you would be with them. We also ask you, particularly for Year 12 students, as they prepare for their exams, that you would give them peace, that you would author their time, and that you would enable them to optimize all of the work that they have done in their final exams. In your name we ask this. Amen.
Thank you. We are going to start with the panellists tonight, so I really don't have much work to do to introduce Dr Collier to you, because you all know who he is. He's going to begin with just a little bit of an update. At our P&F meetings, Dr Collier for many years has given a little bit of an update of where the school is. So he's going to begin with that, and then he's going to talk a little bit of leadership and what he has learned, or some insights that he has developed about leadership over his many years of being principal, I think, of 4 schools. So Dr Collier, over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I shall keep the update brief because it's not the main purpose of the evening, and I'll speak about just one matter which is pertinent to the moment, and that's COVID-19. We have had no cases in our school community of COVID-19, and we pray the Lord it will remain so. We have plans for evacuation which are finely tuned should we need to apply them. We very much hope we don't. And we are awaiting further government advice, mediated through New South Wales Health, as to what protocols will emerge further. We hope that we'll be able to open up even more, but because of the responsibility of so many in our school community, we're operating cautiously and conservatively. So we have all students back, other than 2 who are marooned in China and have been since February, and we feel very sorry for them. We're providing them with every assistance we possibly can, but everybody else is here, and we have managed to re-enter sport under strict protocols. When Harry speaks to us, he may bemoan the fact that our rugby first 15 travelled 2 hours to the Southern Highlands on Saturday and were on the field for 3 minutes until an electrical storm ended the game, and then they spent 2 hours driving home. Not a good time ratio from play to travel. But COVID-19 at the moment has had a minimal impact on the school, although a major impact on the economy. And we await further events. Now on to the matter of leadership. It's nice to be invited to speak about leadership as someone with majors in history and political science at university. I'm a student of leadership, and particularly of the disastrous impact of poor leadership across the centuries. As a practitioner, I've been a principal for 30 years. So I'm actually the longest serving head of school in our sector, but don't be thinking I'm old. I was in short pants when I began. And I've been on the executive of schools for 40 years, so I've seen a lot. And what I must say is that the notion of leadership in schools has changed radically, as has the notion of leadership in society. So once authoritarian leadership was expected and practiced, but within a society where people are more conscious of individual liberties and of the desire to participate and of individual rights, that kind of leadership isn't appropriate or successful in the modern age. And so there was a breakthrough in the 1980s with an important work by Greenleaf, who wrote about the concept of servant leadership, which was leadership really to serve the stakeholders, to serve the recipients of the leadership. It's actually a Christian concept because Jesus led for the sake of others, and that's well documented in the Gospels in the New Testament. And so Greenleaf shifted the focus away from egocentric leadership to leadership which was actually service for others and consideration of their needs. That was a shift also from the leadership manual, so to speak, which had been produced in the 1930s by Dale Carnegie, a wealthy and influential American businessman who wrote a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it was a bestseller, and the thesis of the book essentially was you actually appeal to self-interest. That is to say, you just butter people up and give them what they want. And in the modern age, that seems to be somewhat morally bankrupt, in that leading for the self-interested people is not necessarily leading for the good. So in educational spheres, in the 1990s, an American leadership guru emerged and was highly influential, Professor Thomas Sergiovanni, a professor of education at one of the big universities in Texas. And he dominated the field of leadership theory for about 10 years. And he was very well attuned to ethical leadership because he's actually a Catholic priest. And so he could lead from the heart and he could lead for the good. And Sergiovanni talked about the need to master a whole lot of simultaneous domains of leadership, cultural, symbolic, organisational, and his most interesting category, leadership by outrage, calling out that which was improper, which couldn't be allowed to continue. We've seen examples of that recently in the Black Lives Matter movement. Occasionally, I enact leadership by outrage, but happily not very often. It tends to be a mode that can only be used occasionally, or it loses its effect. So under the influence of Sergiovanni and others who followed him, the importance of trust and integrity and character has come to the fore, where these are essential elements of good leadership and where leaders must be able to be trusted. They must be trustworthy people of integrity. And so again, this sense of leadership from the heart and leadership with who you are has become very important. So when I try to persuade staff of something, I find it helpful to take the high moral ground. That is to say, what is actually in the interests of our students and parents? What will be helpful? What is right? What is fair? What is equitable? In my earlier career, before I became a head, I worked for 6 different principals across a number of schools. And they ranged, frankly, from the completely incompetent, of whom in my judgment there were 2, through the good to very good, and one who was off the chart brilliant. And anything useful I learned about principalship, I learned from him. It was my great good fortune that not only did I serve under him as a head of department, what we call a leader of learning, But in my second principalship, he became my chairman. And what was distinctive about him was his forthrightness combined with his integrity. So he was completely courageous and fearless, and his saying was, "I just did what was right," which from him was a very powerful guiding principle. And the motto of the school, loyalty, sincerity, generosity, was actually a summary of him and his leadership. So the school he led was actually all the Mountables. It was a government school and it was sited on a creek bed, so when it rained, the classrooms filled with water. But despite that, the Department of Education sent international delegations of ministers for education and directors general to that school, despite its poor physical appearance, to see how a good school was run. So he led from his character, and that's really what mattered. In this century, the work of Michael Fullan and Andy Hargroves, two professors of education who work together, has come to the fore. And their concept has been one of leadership density or distributed leadership, where what matters is to distribute authority to quite a band of leaders in the school. So that gets away from the sense of solo, heroic, Olympian, messianic leadership and engages the whole team, and in so doing extends the reach of leadership because a team can achieve more than any individual. So here at SACS we have 80 people on the leadership team. That's a very large leadership footprint. And to me what's important is to identify these people and then to empower them and unleash them, and then to support them and monitor their work. So my concept is if we have the right people, they can be let loose to do their jobs without micromanagement and simply given the authority and the support to benefit the school and to lead in their domains. So that's strategic, or at least I believe it is. One thing that's very important in leadership density is employing people who are actually better than you are, better than oneself. Because in doing that, the quality of the whole organisation will lift. The American research says that some principals don't actually employ the best person at job interview because they're too frightened of the dazzling competence of that person. Whereas to me, that's folly. Appointing the best person is only good for the whole organisation. And such people should be allowed to run wild, as it were, within their authority in the school. My doctoral research was largely on leadership, and amongst other things I studied the leadership and management of middle management, that is of leaders of learning, of heads of department. And what the literature revealed and what the study revealed is that most people in middle management in schools are doing one of two things. They're either emulating a fine leader they saw previously, perhaps someone they work for, or they're operating in reaction against someone who was very poor. So what we're doing here at SACS is we're trying to deepen the training and development of our leadership team and our emerging leaders. And to that end, Dr McGonigle, who will speak next, is writing a leadership course for us, which will engage our people deeply. One of the most important lessons, I think, about leadership, particularly in schools where we're dealing with young people, is that leadership is actually about people. It's not about filling in forms or bureaucracy or compliance. It's actually about people. And while it's easier to be absorbed in organisational leadership, it's very important to remember that the aim is the people themselves and not the bureaucracy. One of my most interesting lessons, so to speak, in leadership was when my wife and I went to South Africa on the way to a conference around 20 years ago. And it was shortly after Nelson Mandela had retired as President of South Africa. And the footprint he had on that society was simply extraordinary. All races and all classes revered him. And so even though Mandela by this time had no formal authority, simply his expression of an opinion would determine the outcome because he had such colossal moral authority as a very great man. I've not seen leadership like that anywhere else, certainly never in Australia. I suppose there's only one Mandela. Some other thoughts on leadership. Leadership is different from management in that it's more strategic. It's about tomorrow rather than today, to simplify it. It's about looking over the horizon at what's coming rather than simply being content with the present. Sometimes it's about rattling the cage and upsetting the apple cart for the ongoing good of the organisation. I did a leadership course at Regent College in Vancouver about 15 years ago. And I assumed that the course may be a course in how to best manipulate people to achieve your goals. That was a cynical view. It was nothing like that. The course was entirely about character. And the whole thesis of the course was that to lead successfully, the leader needs to be a person of integrity and substance and character. And that was very interesting in terms of best leadership theory. So increasingly what the literature is saying is that leaders need to lead out of who they are. And if they're not able to do that, they'll quickly be caught out. If they're imposters, they'll quickly be caught out. Now at that point I should say all of us who lead who are self-reflecting to some extent suffer from imposter syndrome. That is to say, can I actually do this task? Can I actually do this job? It's so vast, there are so many aspects of it. I see my weaknesses. Can I do this? And when some of my staff say that to me about them, my response is, I'm delighted to hear you say that because it shows me two things. Firstly, you understand the immensity of the role, and secondly, you are quite sane. That is to say, you're not taken up with any kind of inflated view of your own importance or quality, because essentially we're all broken vessels and we all do the best we can. None of us can produce perfection, and so we produce our best effort. Some final comments to this sort of grab bag of unrelated thoughts, which I hope cohere in some way. My view on leadership and working with the leadership team is I want to avoid groupthink. That is to say, many organisations ossify because their leaders are so busy being nice to one another. And what can happen is that they don't challenge one another with unsettling ideas. So I encourage our leadership team here to speak frankly within meetings and to rattle the cage. And we do that without breach of relationship because it's not personally aimed, it's aimed at getting to the best outcome for the sake of the people. And therefore I like cognitive dissonance. I like people to disagree because out of reacting to that, we can come to a better place in terms of what's the best thing to do. So, as I say, that's a range of thoughts. I don't pretend that I'm an expert in the field of leadership. What I can say is I've seen a lot of it and I've practiced a lot of it, however imperfectly. I think leadership is a troubled concept in our society, and to crystallise outstanding leadership is hard, and I'd suggest we rarely see it at any point in society. And when we do see it, as I saw with this, I think, world-class principal under whom I served, it's very evident. On that note, I shall stop and introduce our second speaker, Dr Julie McGonigle. And I first have to address the question to some of you, who is Dr McGonigle? Well, let me say by way of introduction, Dr McGonigle is speaking to us from holidays in Northern Ireland. And when she speaks, you'll notice the gentle Irish lilt. We've tried to get her to speak properly, as we Australians do, and that's a work in progress. Dr McGonigle is one of our deputy heads of school. She actually lives in England. And if you think that's bizarre, then let me say it is. But it's based on several assumptions. Firstly, one can do a great deal these days by distance made. And Dr McGonigle attends most of our council subcommittee meetings and many of our internal management meetings by Teams or Zoom, no matter what time of night where she is. And many of the quality aspects that you see coming through the school in terms of teaching and learning, professional development of staff and policies are from her hand, on her pen or keyboard. And much of the mentoring of our leadership team is by Dr McGonigle herself. In 2017, she was here for the whole year as Deputy Academic Improvement, and she did a very great deal of tremendous benefit to the school in that year. And since that time, she has been here remotely on half a load. That is to say, she spends half her time working for us, half the time in a creative senior position in England. And as of the beginning of next term, we'll transition Dr McGonigle into being 0.8, that is 4 days a week working at SACS. And when the airlines allow us and the government allows us to do so, she'll make further flying visits, as she does most years, to SACS to come into the school and go berserk in the most helpful way, achieving many of her goals working with staff. So the performance appraisal system that we use for staff, the learning walks, staff visitation to classrooms that students are experiencing are all designed by Dr McGonigle. So at that point, it's time to invite her to give us some reflections on leadership and perhaps refer to the leadership course that she's developed with us here at SACS. Thanks, Dr McGonigle.
Thanks, Dr Collier. Hello again, everyone. A couple of months ago, I started to try to document the why and the what and the how of our leadership approach at St Andrews. And once we have that fully agreed upon, then that enables us to develop both masterclasses and training modules for the leadership that Dr Collier has referred to that we have at St Andrews. At the moment, we're at the user testing phase of that. So we've started to test it with various different types of leader. So I'm not going to share the whole of that project with you this evening, but I will just give you a little bit of insight into where we're up to on the answer to the why of leadership and the what of leadership and the how of leadership. Now I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Can you see, can we hear that? Can we see that? Lynn, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? No?
It's completely blank at the moment.
Oh, but you can see a blank screen, can you?
Screen, definitely, yeah.
Okay, great. So just before I begin, no?
Yep, it's all good.
It's all good? Okay. Just before I begin, Lynn asked me just to mention a couple of contextual statements just about myself. I'll link those into leadership. Before I had children, I was a deputy head for 10 years. And then I had children, and the first thing just to say is every day of having children, I believe, is better leadership training in a school than you would have from anything else. So I thought I'll begin by sharing, if I can, my children. Here they are. So I have 3 children. This was them last week. As you can see, they are enough to be getting on with. Rafferty in the front has just finished year 3. He'll be starting year 4 in September. Ines behind the girl, she has just finished year 5, starting year 6 in September. And Theo behind that again is just finished year 7, starting year 8 in September. So they were at SACS in 2017 and absolutely loved it, had a brilliant time. That gave me insight into the school as both a school leader and a parent, and the ability to tie those 2 things together. The next point that John has already mentioned is that I'm from Northern Ireland. As you know, it's our British summertime at the moment, and I spent last week in Northern Ireland. And while I was there, John Hume, who you may have heard of, sadly passed away. I wanted to mention him because he's probably one of the most influential political leaders on my life. For those of you who don't know, in 1998, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. That was closely followed by him winning the Gandhi Peace Award and then the Martin Luther King Award. He's the only political leader that has won 3 major peace awards, and he was the leader of the SDLP party. He single-handedly brought about the disarmament of the IRA in 1994, and then himself crafted the Belfast Agreement, which was agreed in 1998, which has brought significant peace to Northern Ireland. And he is one of the most assuming, quiet-spoken individuals, but in his many eulogies from global leaders all around the world, they said a lot of different things about him. Tony Blair said that he was a political titan and a visionary. Bill Clinton, who worked closely with him at that time, said that he was someone who refused to accept that the past was all there could be. But the statement that most significantly stood out to me was when in one political commentator narrated the fact that he was at the core deeply convicted about the dignity of every human being. He was at the core deeply convicted about the dignity of every human being. And political leaders are like school leaders in that it's all about people. And that's where I'm going to start today, thinking about when we think about the why of school leadership, we are simply thinking about what do we believe about human beings. Because when you narrate what you believe about human beings, everything else in a school flows from that point. So if we do a little thought experiment, if you have a Cartesian view, like Descartes, and you believe, I think, therefore I am, the impact of that on your school policies will be very much you believe in the academic track solely. So all the other things that we're perhaps going to hear about tonight about students getting insight into leadership or outdoor pursuits or the co-curricular or the importance of community or the development of character, those will not be so important to your school policies. So that is, I believe, the most important thing about any school leader is what do they believe about a human being. So let me just show you where we've got to in SACS in hoping to articulate that well. Okay, so if we start with the why, Our approach to school leadership is grounded in our belief that every person is made in the image of God. There is a phrase, Imago Dei, which means in the image of God. So as a Christian school, that is the very heart of our belief about the nature of the human being. And from that flows a number of other different beliefs and viewpoints about people. So number one, 2 words there, infinitely precious. Every human being, no matter where they come from, what their background is, what their connections are, what their ability is infinitely precious. So at SACS, that's where we begin. And a bit like John Hume, the dignity and the value of every human being, regardless of anything that they've done. And I'll show you in a minute how that why flows into the what of what we do. Secondly, gifted for a purpose. Everybody is uniquely made and has unique abilities and gifts to carry out a contribution, a unique contribution in this world. And that flows out of being made in the image of God. That it's not just a case of you've got 1 or 2 people who've got gifts and talents and the rest don't, that we actually believe that everybody does, and that part of what school is about is understanding what are those gifts and talents and how can I use them to serve the world. Thirdly, moral responsibility, the great conviction that our choices have consequences. And for young people, sometimes when they're young, they don't realize because they don't necessarily have the consequences that you do face later on in life. So part of our responsibility in a school is to help young people understand your choices every single day, every minute of every single day, have an impact on your character, which has an impact on your life and those around you. And then fourthly, collectively stewarding, that we've been given the gift of this world, and that together as a unit that we are actually stewarding the resources that we've got. Now that why flows into the what. Now all of that why is related to students, but at the moment, from what I tell you this evening, I'm going to talk to you about how it links with the what of school leadership. So our beliefs about a human being flows into our priorities. In order to communicate to young people that they are valuable, we need to build a community where people believe that they are valued. That's the first part of a school's job. So young people, when they come to SACS, we want them to know you are part of our community. In all your difference, in all your diversity, you are part of our community. So the top priority is about that. And you can see there's a little blurb there, leaders build a community where partnerships are vibrant, and that's partnerships with parents and with other stakeholders, and where everyone is valued. Staff members believe that they're valued, students believe that they're valued simply because of who they are and not because of anything else. Secondly, gifted for a purpose means that our role is to shape curriculum so that students can develop the expertise that they need and the wisdom that they need in order to use the expertise wisely in this world. Thirdly, moral responsibility. Choices have consequences. That's about the development of character, and I know that you've heard quite a lot about that before now, about our programs in SACS which are about the development of character, and that's about the character and the convictions. So part of the Christian ethos is enabling students to think about the big questions in life and to have a forum and a safe place where they can actually debate and think about those questions. And so that's one of our top priorities. And then fourthly, as leaders are flowing out of collective stewardship, is our need to steward resources and design systems that enable all of the building community, shaping curriculum and developing character. So you can see the little blurb there beside. Leaders steward resources responsibly, create sustainable systems and routines to achieve the accountabilities above. So that gives you a little bit of insight into our why and our what. And as I say, we're in the user testing phase of that at the moment. So if we go on to the how, so we know why we're doing what we do, we know what we've got to do, how do we go about doing it? And this is a sort of methodology. As part of this project, we want to specify a methodology for leaders that will be clear in their minds as to how we want them to go about doing their role. So in order to do this, we have employed a hosting metaphor. So this metaphor was first introduced to SACS about a year ago, and often we talk about servant leadership, and that is absolutely at the core of our how. But the hosting metaphor, and you can see the various different types of hosting in the background. Sometimes you're hosting huge, big events. Sometimes it's just neighbours round for a barbecue. Sometimes it's simply a weekday meal. So the hosting metaphor, we believe, brings together the idea that you are owning and accountable for what is produced, but all the time serving those whom you have invited, or serving those whom you are, who are your, I mean, we don't really call them customers, but in this situation, it's students. So you can see there, being a great leader is like being a great host. Whilst you own the event, and it's important that leaders understand they are accountable and they do, they need to own it and every little detail of it, but their ultimate aim is to serve their guests. We've then gone on to expand on this hosting metaphor into different levels of what leaders do. So you can see here that we've split up the different levels that leaders work at. So sometimes they are setting direction, and to some degree that's hosting the equivalent of a formal dinner party. Sometimes they're engaged in alignment. That's the equivalent of a barbecue. Sometimes they're designing systems and routines, like a dinner party. They're facilitating teams and meetings, like a weekend meal, or we've called it doing the work, which is the upfront stuff. The day-to-day educating both staff and students. Now, one of the most difficult things about leadership is moving up and down. If you imagine this as a continuum, moving up and down this continuum at the right time. So setting direction doesn't take place very often. That might, in terms of strategic planning, every 5 years, in terms of development planning, every 2 years, in terms of action planning, it might be every term. But setting direction, like formal dinner parties, doesn't take place all of the time. Whereas you've got your weekday doing the work, you've got lessons to teach, you've got assemblies, you've got staff devotions, meetings, professional development. So you have to move up and down, and you have to change your approach to leadership as you go. So each of the 5 basic leadership tasks require you to apply a different style, mindset and tool set to succeed. And that's one of the most difficult things to get right as a school leader, because some people are more suited for the direction setting and less suited for the facilitation. Some people are more suited for the basic teaching and less suited for the strategic thinking. And it's to try and equip all of our leaders to make sure that they are able to do all of the various tasks that leadership requires. So that gives you just a little insight into our why and our what and our how. And I will just finish with this quote just from John Hume, which is, "I never thought in terms of being a leader. I thought very simply in terms of helping people." And I think that 2 of the things that were said to me about leadership that have really stuck with me is, firstly, think, if you want to be a good school leader, think like a parent. And the second is, make sure that you realize it is about helping people. And I'm now going to hand over to the people that we help, which is Harry. So he can tell you the real story now. On you go, Harry.
Thank you, Dr. McGonigle. So, good evening. my name is Harry Carson, and I was the school captain for 2019 and 2020, along with Freya Leach. I came to St Andrews in 2015, starting in Year 7. I have 3 other siblings who have all attended St Andrews, one older sister who graduated in 2017, and 2 brothers who are in Year 9 who I played first cricket with, so my family made up a quarter of the cricket team. I've also participated in Makerspace, rugby, water polo, athletics, and the swim team, as well as being a participant and mentor in Startup. Tonight, I'm going to share with you my experience as school captain last year and this year, explaining some of the preparation that students go through in Year 11 and 12 as they begin the process of leadership at St Andrews. Finally, what we did as leaders this year and our goals and challenges. Firstly, I would like to share with you the preparation students in Year 11 and 12 have and during their leadership application. At the start of Year 11, students can apply for a role as a peer support leader. A peer support leader is a student who becomes a mentor for Year 7 students. These leaders meet with the younger students on their very first day to make them feel more comfortable in the new environment, and then every Friday following, allowing them to build relationships and give advice for their time at high school. Another opportunity is being selected as a house officer. House officers help the house captain out with their sometimes challenging and time-consuming role. The house officers gain leadership experience and skills through the time spent with the head of house and house captain. These skills are then used to help lead house meetings and help assist the house captain in house events like Bake Off and SACS Factor. In October, at the start of Year 12, the whole year group goes on retreat to YouthWorks in Port Hacking. This retreat includes many initiative activities that help you build on leadership skills that students have developed in previous years. Some of these activities include making a raft, teamwork exercise as shown in the photo, and other small games that develop critical thinking and recognize people's strengths and weaknesses. If you are selected as a student leader, you undergo further leadership preparation as a whole leadership team. The first event as a whole leadership team is to participate in the Leadership Day, where leaders work with Miss Witherich, Mr. Lindsay, and Reverend Tubman. This day allows them to prepare for the year ahead, as well as understand what it takes to be a leader and how you can show leadership in a school community. The day allows new leaders to spend time together and bond as a unit. Having the incoming leaders commissioned in Term 3 allows for the outgoing leaders to work with them and help them prepare for the year ahead. Just recently, the outgoing captains and the incoming captains, both school and vice captains, had an afternoon tea where we were able to share with them what we did as leaders, how we overcame challenges, and tips on being an effective school leader, along with them sharing with us what they are planning to do for the upcoming year. Once you become a student leader, there are many activities that you can participate in. One of the more frequent ones is meetings. Every fortnight, the whole leadership team gets together for a meeting. During this meeting, everyone gets told about any up-and-coming events. The leaders talk about any problems they've observed or initiatives the team want to run. Another meeting happens every Monday during morning tea, where the captaincy group meet with Dr Collier. In this meeting, we discuss any events we are required at, sharing any issues the students may have, and information about what is happening in the school. At one of these meetings, the captaincy group even got to meet the Education Minister of New South Wales. Another part of the process is Assemblies, Chapel, and Term Services. Every fortnight, a senior college leader MCs the Senior College Assembly. In this assembly, they welcome any guests, read the Bible verse, and introduce a music item. One of the hardest jobs if you get an obscure Latin name. Every week, Rev Tubman asks a senior student to read the Bible for chapel. And finally, every term, the captains MC the term service. Most recently, the online term service for Anzac Day. In this service, Freya, the other school captain, read the Bible and prayed, while I interviewed Mrs. Jarvis, who gave a recount of an old Andrian, Neville Stokes. You can still watch this service on the St Andrews YouTube channel. Other events that student leaders can be a part of are different school events. These events, student leaders can volunteer and represent the school in. These include the night of celebration, where leaders can usher and welcome important guests, the Friends of SACS and Gawara evening, shown in the photo, where student leaders become waiters for the night, and the school's expo, where students can explain what they love about the school to potential parents. There are also many social events that come with being a student leader. Prefect days and afternoon teas bring together a range of different school leaders. At the start of this year, there was an Archbishop's commissioning service in the cathedral, where all of Sydney Anglican schools came together for a sermon by the Archbishop Glenn Davies. A more social event are the Prefect afternoon teas, where schools host different leaders from multiple schools for an afternoon of bonding to see what other leadership teams are doing and how you can continue to build upon these leadership skills. At the start of our term of being student leaders, at our leadership day, we set ourselves 2 goals. The first was to build relationships with the students in and around the school, as well as build upon the pride people have with St Andrews, called SACS Pride. Due to the increased size of the school, there's become very limited ways that the whole school can get together. As student leaders, we saw this as a potential problem, which led to us to try show leadership throughout the whole school by building relationships. Personally, I was able to fulfill this by helping coach certain junior and middle school students in my co-curricular activities. Others were able to build relationships with students during school hours or at different school events. Throughout our time at St Andrews, we have observed the pride everyone shows in the school. We knew we wanted to continue building that legacy and continue to build upon the unique community that has been created and get everyone behind the one message of SACS Pride. While setting these goals were good, there were many challenges that came in our way during student leadership, being the main one, COVID-19. The first week we began distance learning, we posed ourselves a question. How do you show leadership in a school you aren't physically in? This led to many ideas, with the main theme being our online presence using Facebook and Instagram. Student leaders shared a video called The Daily Dose, which was posted on these social medias. In these videos, we shared tips for online learning and mental health. The sports captain shared Fitness Friday posts with workout routines to stay active during these times at home, as well as the SACS Pride Pet Competition for your pet to be published in the Andrian Yearbook at the end of the year. And as I talked about previously, the Anzac Day term service. This was done to limit the loss of community that everyone loves about St Andrews. Overall, I believe we overcame this challenge of COVID and answered the questions we set ourselves at the start of remote learning. So that is the very basics of student leadership at St Andrews during year 11 and 12. I'll be able to answer any questions you have at the Q&A after the rest of the presentations. I would now like to introduce Mr. John Chapman, Head of Outdoor Ed, to talk about gaining leadership skills through outdoor education.
Thanks very much, Harry. It's great to be with everybody, although I'm used to seeing people in the bush somewhere. Can everybody hear me? Yep, good. So it's a little bit different to be talking to people through a computer, but we'll make do. Thanks, Harry, and everybody else for presenting. It's been really interesting to hear what other people think. Outdoor ed is an important part of the school, but sometimes we're a little bit separate from everybody else. So it's nice to get a bit of insight onto where we're headed with leadership. I'll just share a little bit of something here. No point talking about outdoor ed if we can't show you photos of the outside. Just a little bit about myself. This is my family. My wife Bethany, my son Samuel, who is 4 and starting school next year. Won't be at St Andrews because I live in the Blue Mountains. That's a little bit of a trek for him. And then my daughter Kate, who is 1.5. These photos from our trip at the start of this year to the US. Very bad timing in terms of COVID, but it was a great trip nonetheless. And I can definitely echo Dr McGonagall's comments on parenting being a daily dose of leadership. I've worked in outdoor ed since 2008. I started as a group leader and kind of worked my way up. I have worked with St Andrews throughout that time and started full-time on the outdoor ed team here in 2012. I then kind of took over running the department in 2015 and officially became the head of outdoor ed at the end of last year. Outdoor ed's a very important part, as we said, of the student life at St Andrews for a few reasons. We get to kind of teach those things that are a bit different or teach in a different way than what the students get at the classroom at the school. And that has its challenges as a staff member, time away and physical challenges and mental challenges and things, but those are the things that we're also trying to get our students through and have them learn from. So it's great to see the growth in many ways that our students exhibit over the different camps that we take them on, and just experience some of the amazing places that we go to and the fun things that we do. I've got a bit of a soft spot for the Backcountry snow camp that we run for year 10. All our year levels, I'll give you a run through in a minute of how they go, but this one happens every now and then on year 10 when the students choose it. We get to ski up onto the main range, hauling all our equipment with us, and if we're lucky and the weather cooperates, we'll actually ski off the top of Mount Cossey and we'll stay in tents up there. So it's a pretty amazing experience that not many others get to do. And then, of course, you probably have heard of the Cossey to Coast program, or the 20-day program that we run again as a year 10 option. Just spending that amount of time with students can be a bit trying from time to time, but it's quite amazing to be able to experience that growth and just make a connection that we don't usually get in the classroom with students. I'll give you a bit of a run through on why I think, or how I think outdoor education will or does help grow leadership in our students. Quickly, for those who may not be familiar, I'll give you a run through of what outdoor ed looks like at St Andrews. We start now from kindergarten, we run all the way through to year 10. We did used to go from year 3 up, but last year we started with kinder, year 1 and year 2. Our camps build on skills learnt in the previous years and on experiences and challenges that we've had in previous years. So it's a sequential program all the way through. Kiriki is the site that we own as a school. It's down in the Southern Highlands in Penrose. It's the only place that we own real grass and real trees, so it's quite nice to be able to get there with students. Hopefully more and more of our staff can get down there as well, and you may have seen it on a picnic day, hopefully one of these years. If not, it'd be great to get you at picnic day next year. So quick overview, kinder to year 2 is all about engaging with the outdoors and having fun with each other in a different way than you would in the classroom. Kinder and year 1 are out for one day around different parts of Sydney. And year 2, they actually have their first, well, it's a bit of a sleepover. They'll be out for the day, but then they also sleep down in our sports centre, the newly renovated sports centre down on the ground floor of SAH. And we actually bring in tents from the outdoor ed department, and they'll stay in tents and have a bit of a sleepover. That's quite tough for some. This might be their first night away from parents, and we've decided to move that to year 2 rather than putting it in year 3 down at Kirrikee. So year 3 and year 4, students spend one night at Kirrikee, all sorts of different activities. We're looking again at starting to build community in a different way. It might be the first time that people have spent 2 nights away from parents. Students get to see each other in different ways than they would in the classroom, and we start to challenge them on different things that we want them to do. So there's roping components, there's initiative games, as Harry mentioned earlier in the year 12 section, and we facilitate all that through our leaders that we have. Year 5 and 6, again, still at Kirrikee, we build up to 2 nights out for each of those programs, so a 3-day program. And again, more activities, we step it up the next notch. We start doing abseiling, which forces many to confront fears that they may have not confronted before. And again, we're looking for personal growth across a range of areas and character traits. Year 7, obviously there's a big influx of students in year 7. We go from around 60 or so in year 6 up to anywhere up to 168. So we run programs, the same program across a number of different weeks. So we run through different groups from the year level. We base that mainly at Kirrikee, but a few different areas. So we stay one night at Bungonia, and we bring in an expedition, a one night camping out in tents. There's caving and abseiling at Bungonia, a bunch more activities at Kirrikee that we run through, road gains, that kind of thing. We'll talk through a little bit how these all enhance and facilitate some leadership skills in a minute. Year 8 jumps, well, year 7 and 8 are both for 5 days, but year 8 we go predominantly on expedition. So they've got 2 options. They can go through Kangaroo Valley, so it's a paddle and a hike, or there is an option to do a holiday program, a little less of a holiday than some might feel. There's four nights of hiking in there, and then we also take them up to the Gold Coast, which is the holiday part. We have a bit of a focus on building towards an expedition, longer term in terms of time frames and in wilderness areas. Those are the parameters that we set that allow us to have the best learning of an experiential nature for the students, or at least that's what we think from our background and our study in outdoor education. Year 9 is one of our pinnacle programs. Most choose to go on the snow. It's a 6-day trip, but they'll stay 4 nights up on the snow in tents. So it's quite confronting. Most find it very challenging compared to any other year level. And it's primarily based on knowing yourself, knowing what your limits are, and coordinating what you need to do to stay warm, to stay dry. And then we've got smaller groups of 12 out, plus whoever is in your tent that you're staying with. So you're looking at leadership on different levels in small groups of 3 or 4, and then your group of 12, and supporting each other through the experience. Year 10, there's a whole bunch of options. It's the last year, as I said earlier, that they do outdoor education. So it gives them the opportunity to pick something they kind of want to do. So you've got mountain biking. That picture was New Zealand after he'd ridden up a hill, so not all were 100% happy about the trip at that time, but you learn from that as well. Hiking in Larapinta, we've got horse riding in Victoria, sea hiking in Mile Lakes, and then our kind of pinnacle program is the 20-day or Cozy to Coast, which really gives us the opportunity to do some in-depth leadership through learning what that means, but also experiencing that face to face. So a couple of photos from the 20-day. They start by hiking over the Cozy main range. This is in November, but there's often a lot of snow left. And then we've got the paddling section when they get down to the Snowy River. and they finish at the Victorian coast, at a place called Marlow. Now, leadership is for us, pardon me, I'll just close that one. Leadership for us is part of kind of a multifaceted approach to what we want people to learn while they are out on programs. So the SACS vision that the school has is to inspire students to be passionate, creative learners who engage with the message of Christ and fully develop their gifts and abilities in order to serve the world. And as Dr McGonigle said earlier, we've got a big focus on servant leadership. And that's a really important thing for us to live that out in the way that we run our programs, to be an example of that as the staff, both full-time and casuals that we bring onto programs. Because as those of us who have kids know, you can tell them 100 different things and they will remember 2, but they will remember everything that you do and they will copy that. So it's really important to us, as Dr Collier said earlier, that our staff live what we want our students to learn. That's a big part of what we do on program. Our vision fits in with the school's vision in that we want to take students out of the classroom and learn some of the things that other people may not be able to teach. We want them to learn in a different way than they usually would in the classroom, but we also want to complement what they're learning in the classroom. We do that via an experiential model. So if I'm doing my job correctly, essentially it looks like I'm incredibly lazy and I'm doing nothing. The idea is that students will take on the roles that we need them to take on the program. We want them to look after themselves. We want them to look after each other. We want them to step up into different leadership roles that we will make explicit, but there is the implicit just living together as a community and learning to get along with one another when you can't finish at 3:15 and go home and then come back tomorrow. You're with those people for anything up to 20 days. So a lot of the learning happens in a way that we structure, but if we're doing our jobs correctly, it's not an obvious structure. There's just intrinsic learning that goes on there. We want students to learn to lead by throwing in the deep end sometimes. We can talk about what leadership is, we talk through leadership styles, we give some framework around how that looks, but by allowing them just to jump in and lead, maybe fail, which is fine, but allowing them to just lead lets them learn and take all the things that they've learned at school and put them into practice. So we're there if they fail. We'll talk through how they could have done things better. We can do that as a small group. We can do that one-on-one. It depends on the year level as to how we do that. So kind of in the earlier years, we're building community in junior school. We're putting them into initiative games, little things where they get to try out being a leader. When we hit year 8, because it's an expedition, we can give them some time to be leaders. So students will pair up and be the leaders of the group for half a day. Obviously, we're there in the background to monitor things and to give them a little bit of guided help and step in if there's any kind of issues that we need to deal with from a safety point of view, but giving them the opportunity to decide when to take breaks and where they should be walking and all those kind of things is really helpful. As Dr McGonigle said earlier, all the choices that we make have consequences, and that's really shown when we're on programs. If one kid decides while they're the leaders to take too many breaks, then you get into camp a bit later and that has consequences on how you set up your tents and all those kind of things. If you don't take enough breaks, then the morale of your group might drop a little bit. So there's always these actions and consequences that are really on a simple level in a simple community. They're really in your face, but we learn things from that we can take away to life in general. Year 9, again, as I said, on the Snow and on the Murray, there's different things that come out of that in a different style of program, personal leadership and in smaller groups and looking after one another. Year 10, again, it's similar from year 8 and year 9, they'll each get a chance to lead. On the 20-day program, students will get a chance to lead for a whole day, at least, sometimes two, by themselves, and they're the leader for the day. And again, a lot of our leadership team come out of that 20-day program or have done that 20-day program, and it's our pleasure as the staff to see where they are at the start of the 20 days, and then just through living in community and the physical and all the other challenges that are in there, and through explicit kind of debriefing of the leadership that they have and their style and how they might take on a different style and all those kind of things that we get to spend time with them doing in an amazing environment, we see a really great growth through those students. The last kind of point I wanted to leave people with is that leadership is fantastic, but it's not something that can be taught in isolation. If we try and give someone one character that we build up, if you're not building up the other characters and the traits and the care and all those kind of things alongside it, it's really hard for someone to shine as a leader if they lack emotional intelligence, if their knowledge, their understanding of others is not particularly high. We work on their organisational ability, we work on creativity, teamwork, what their leadership styles might look like, how to exercise authority in a serving manner and in a Christ-like manner. And then also, how do we take on responsibility for the decisions that we make? And as I said before, these things are all really apparent. Every choice you make in that kind of sphere has some kind of a consequence that might be immediate or might be something a bit further down the track. But we really enjoy working through all of the character building, holistic development and growth of the students. And, you know, it's just our good fortune to be able to do that while hiking or paddling or something like that. Put me in a classroom, I don't know how I'd go, but I really enjoy being out in the wilderness and creation with our students. Just wanted to read one section from the kind of strategic plan that the Outdoor Ed Department has put together in response to the school's wider one. It's talking about our focus on community, and I'll bring it up for you. Oh, not from the beginning. Let's get through those. It says programs are built around the small temporary community of camp groups. These are the core units in which all programs take place. Challenges on programs are faced as a team, and the development of teamwork and communication are integral to the camp experience. Students are given many opportunities to practice leadership of their group through outdoor education programs. Staff model servant leadership, humility and selflessness, and these qualities are encouraged and developed in students. Relationships created and strengthened on programs are important for students both on camp and into the future. And key to all areas of our programs is that our students and our staff have fun. So hopefully that's given you a little bit more of a idea of where Outdoor Ed fits into character development and leadership through the rest of the school, and hopefully it hasn't bored you too much. I'll hand back to Lynn. I believe we've got some Q&A time.
Yep. Just unmuting. Thank you very much. They were great and very different presentations, which is fantastic because I think that's really what we were trying to get across. I do have a few different questions here, and don't forget that if you've got any at home, you can just type them into the Q&A and we can direct them and get some answers. So actually, I think probably the first one is going to go back to you, John Chapman. I'm going to use last names because of being two Johns there. So two questions. One was, which I think you touched on a little bit in the 20-day, but do you think you can identify future leaders, and roughly what year group do you think that you can sort of look at a student maybe on a camp, like in year 9, do you look at someone and go, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up on the leadership one day? Or is it in year 2 that someone, you know, you see, or is it really not until, you know, much closer? Yeah, so that's the question basically. Do you identify through your outdoor camps who later then becomes one of the student leaders?
Yeah, often we can. It's you identify the loud students very quickly. I'm sure all educators agree with that. But obviously being upfront and being loud doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have all the qualities of leadership. Often, and because we have full-time staff, we will see students in year 2 and year 3, and we'll see them develop across years, not just in one kind of intense program. But often you'll find the students that are a bit quieter but have those caring servant qualities, and you can kind of develop and try and bring them out of their shells a bit so that they might be a little more vocal and able to jump in and be more of a outspoken leader in some ways. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what year level you might pick those up, or we might pick those up. Definitely on 20-day, because we have the time with students, we'll see who has different qualities that might lend themselves to leadership. But you know, there's a few standout kids that you'll pick up from an earlier age. Just go, look, these kids really care about, quite empathetic, and have the innate abilities to do something about that and take on a role. However, on the flip side, you do see some that whose idea of leadership is a very worldly one, not a biblical one, and they like to boss others around rather than being, you know, empathetic and leading towards a goal that's common. And, you know, again, we have the opportunity to have some input there. So I don't know if that's kind of the answer we're looking for, but yeah.
Is there any particular activity, one activity that you see on outdoor education camps that really shows it? Is it putting the tents up? Is it when things get tough? Is it preparing the meals? Is there any sort of like activity in particular where you go, yeah, this is specifically teaching them something about leadership or identifying some leadership skills?
Yep. Ironically, it's the more day-to-day ones that tend to show that. Obviously, doing amazing things like abseiling, you're working on fears and things there, but there's not so much leadership potential in you going over the edge of a cliff by yourself. What we find is the leadership is where times are tough, and again, building community. You've got the shared. You know, everybody goes through a rainy week and it's hard for everybody, and that's where we build community the most. But that's also where you see the students that can step outside themselves and go, yeah, I'm wet and cold and this is not the most fun I've ever had, but everybody else might be feeling the same way. What can I do to raise their spirits? What can I do to just put into the group a little bit more? One thing we do at the start of every program is what we call kind of a group contract. We can do that in a lot of different ways at whatever year level, but essentially that's everybody agreeing on what the culture of that group is going to look like for that camp, and having input into what they want that to look like, and then agreeing that they'll work towards that. So, you know, we're searching for fruits of the Spirit in our students, whether they're Christians or not, and we want them to be able to, you know, care for each other. And I think, you know, from our Northern Ireland example, that's where good leadership starts, and that's something that, as a half Irish man, I appreciate that quite a lot. But yeah, it's those small activities where you're setting up tents, you're cooking, and often when things are tough, that comes out more. And that's why we unapologetically take students to places where there aren't hard top cabins. We want them to carry all their stuff that they need for the week or whatever, because that's where good leadership and learning is often a bit more noticed. So.
Okay, I'm going to go straight to Dr Collier now for the next question. Now, there are two questions here. The first one is the name of the teacher that you served under that you mentioned in your presentation. I've got to get you onto the right person. I forgot that I was on the same screen as you.
The principal I served under was in the 1980s, and his name is Don Harwin, not to be confused with the politician of the same name. Don Harwin Sr. is actually that politician's father, and he went on to be my chairman in my second principalship.
And I think then we've got a question here. How does the school manage the decision-making process when one section of the leadership team makes a decision based on a certain set of criteria, but this criteria is found to over or underemphasise one particular value or concern?
These tensions between different portfolios and different paradigms normally end up with me. And generally speaking, they're talked through at some length within the executive. We meet as a school executive every second week, and we could go on for hours. Some would say too many hours. And normally at that level, the issues are resolved happily. That's not to say that everybody ends up agreeing with everybody else. Certainly a matter of creative tension is both unavoidable and good. We get to a point where everyone knows why everyone else holds the views they do and respects their integrity and the authenticity of their position, and then we make the best decision for the interests of the students at school.
All right, Dr McGonigle, this one's for you. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for an inspiring presentation on why, what and how school leadership, what we're doing. So this one's, given Buckingham and Kaufman's findings on strengths in leadership, do you think it's feasible to train leaders in all these very different competencies? Or is it possible in a school setting to enable leaders to play their strengths and find compensation strategies for their weaknesses? That's a pretty tough one.
Yes, is the short answer. It is possible to enable leaders to play to their strengths. A lot of the literature nowadays would speak of the importance of training the team. So rather than just training an individual, but actually training the whole team, which means that you can make sure that you've covered all the competencies within the group. I also think that it's important for individuals to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So I think if someone can recognize the areas that they're not strong in, I think that that's really important. In the last slide that I showed, which was the different levels of leadership, it is understood that different levels of leadership within a school would need to be better or worse at different ones of those. So if you're a senior leader, you would need to be a strategic thinker. So the ideal is that you don't put people into leadership positions if they don't have the core competencies, but those competencies around the edge, then you can make sure that you are training the whole team so that all of the competencies are covered, a bit like what Dr. Collier was talking about at the beginning. Lynn, you're muted.
Thought I'd unmuted. Sorry, Harry. This one's for you. Is there any particular staff member that has stood out to you as a leader in any way, and why have you chosen that staff member? Sorry, throwing you on the spot here.
I think the person who I work most closely with, Miss Panzak, I think she's been a really good sort of mentor and someone to help me work on my leadership. So I've sort of chosen Miss Panzak because I would speak to her every day, go into her office and sort of talk about what's happening. She'd keep me accountable. So I sort of think because I've worked most closely with her, I think she's one of my favorite sort of leaders in the school, helping me become a better leader, as well as sort of showing me what is possible in like a role that I have.
That's great. Thanks, Harry. I've got one for Dr. McGonigle. When you said in your presentation about thinking like a parent, can you explain what that means in terms of leadership or the approach the school has to leadership?
Sometimes school leaders, it's more the case over here, I think. We get very caught up in accountabilities around school league tables and Ofsted inspections, compliance, administration, systems, the management, does the school management system work, etc., etc. So we get very caught up in those priorities, and we cease to think of what messages the parents are actually getting. So what, in terms of our parent community, what is actually being translated to them and to the students. So it helps you to reprioritize if you think like a parent, not only your educational priorities, but also the whole child, so that you're not simply a school that is about, we want to be #1 in the league tables, but actually we've completely devalued that child into a number in our spreadsheet. So that's a very important shift in your thinking. I also think there's decisions every single day that that if you're thinking it becomes sometimes a conflict on what's good for staff is not always what's good for kids. So it's important to think about, I think if you're thinking like a parent, then you are taking much more the middle ground there. And so it helps you to have a good balance in your decision making.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to, this one actually I'm going to address first of all to Dr Collier, I think. And then it might be one that we invite the others to say as well. So 2 questions. What is the hardest thing you've ever had to do as a leader? And what is the most fun thing you've been able to do as a leader? So the hardest and the most fun.
The hardest things I've had to do are to deal with the death of a student or a staff member. And in any large community, that's going to happen from time to time simply because of the statistical realities. And where it happens suddenly and unexpectedly, it causes huge wrenches within the school, and it's very hard to deal with that given the sheer number of people who are deeply upset. The other hardest thing I've had to do is to dismiss staff members. Happily not something I've had to do for quite some time at SACS. The things that give me the greatest pleasure, I don't know whether that's a correct interpretation of the question, are seeing the great things that students can do. I find that energises me and delights me especially. It doesn't matter the age of the student or what the field, it's wonderful to see the accomplishments of students. Things which are pure fun are the lovely and extraordinary and zany things that staff do. One of my mantras is that we need to play every day. We need to do something that's just pure fun, and staff are well aware of that. And I think some probably run a mile when they see me coming, lest I might be the person who's seeking them out to be the butt of some humour on that day.
That's great. I'm going to ask you, Harry, exactly the same questions. What do you think's been the hardest being school captain, and what do you think's been the most fun?
So personally, I think one of the hardest thing is getting told about something that's coming up in the next day that you haven't planned for. Like a couple of speeches or something to students or different events where you get told the night before and you have to sort of reshuffle your already busy sort of timetable with trainings and stuff like that. So that's probably one of the most challenging parts. But one of the most enjoyable parts about being school captain is everyone in the school sort of knows you as sort of an authority figure, and you're the gap from the sort of students to the teachers. So I like sort of being still one with the student body. Walking around school, I'll make sure I say hi to everyone I know, just to make sure they feel sort of welcome at the school. And I think me in year 7, 8, 9, or even 10 would sort of feel good that the school captain was sort of taking time on his day to like say hello to him or me. And then so I like sort of being sort of inclusive for everyone, and which is sort of good that with all the co-curricular activity that I do, I get to meet all these different people and sort of build relationships with them.
That's great. Thank you, Harry. Dr. McGonigle, I'm going to go to you with the next question, which it's also for Dr. Collier. So we'll go to you first and then we'll go on to Dr. Collier. It's, can you suggest some strategies to use when discussing current global leadership styles with the senior students? So is there a language that can be used that allows a respectful conversation, even when trying to demonstrate the need for integrity and honesty when the examples show the opposite? So I think that's a very delicate way of putting, there are some leaders in the current climate who aren't perhaps showing the type of leadership that we think at SACS would be ideal leadership. How do you have that conversation with senior students? Thanks, Dr. McGonigle.
Great question. The need for teaching students how to debate within a diversity of opinions and viewpoints, I think, is one of our greatest needs at the moment. Because I think social media shows us, and controversial issues show us, that I think that debating skill isn't always there, and I think we very quickly descend into name calling and abuse on social media. So I think that's a very, very important question. One of the things that we're doing in this leadership project is, as well as creating a document that shows the approach for leadership, we're also documenting the tools that we're using along the way. Last year, we developed a teaching and learning model, and we also there documented the tools that we used in order to create that model. So it was very interesting. We had strategic designers help us with that teaching and learning model, and they got the senior staff into a room, all of whom think very differently and operate very differently, but they were able to bring us together and use specific conversational tools that enabled us to all feel heard and to all express our opinions, and to take what can often be a very unwieldy conversation and make it quite pithy. One way of doing this was for them to just say, I want you to say the why and the what of the particular thing that you're going to do. So we had to isolate that first, and we had to engage with our partner, and then we had to engage with the whole group. So that is something that we are looking at very specifically at the moment, and my desire would be to develop that further into coherent training for students about how to deal with controversial issues.
All right, Dr. Collier, did you have anything extra to add for that one?
I don't know whether it's extra, it's probably just reiteration. I think when we speak with students, we have to be authentic and transparent. I'm not suggesting we should be indelicate, but there's no point in being something other than what we are, or suggesting something other than what we believe. Having said that, I agree with Julie that there's a tremendous need for students to learn to hear contrary points of view and to appraise those rather than just shut them out. We see the difficulty within our culture of people locking down on views and not thinking outside their own particular parameters or square. I actually rather like to read and hear views different from my own, because it helps me crystallise what I actually think. So it's important that we teach students to hear others genuinely and to try and understand what they're saying and why they're saying it, and to appraise it. and to treat it with respect, or treat the people with respect, even if we fundamentally disagree with what they're saying, because only through that kind of tolerant listening can we really understand and get to a better place.
I'm going to throw to John Chapman, except that his video is not working, so you're just going to have to hear his voice, everyone, and still look at Dr Collier and myself.
That's right. No one wants to see me anyway, Lynn. That's fine.
I'm not sure. So, John, in that sort of level with students disagreeing, I imagine that's something that you would see different opinions in something like an outdoor education when they have to come to a decision together. Do you find there's that's something that the students learn on outdoor education, how to listen to each other's opinions and come to a resolution?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the situations we're in can often be a bit more high stress or get you kind of your back up a little bit. So you're a little more invested in your point of view often, especially when you're uncomfortable. So it's definitely a big part of the outdoor ed program, in that, you know, you're living with these kids, some of which may be your friends, some of which may be people you don't like at all, some might be people you just don't know. So it's in essence, it's a bit of a microcosm of society at large, and you know, we take small little lessons that we learn in that situation, and then through the way we debrief them, or at least hopefully we debrief them, is to then extrapolate those lessons to society as a larger unit, and you know, really impress on students. Yeah, for example, on 20 day you get your own food. It's all at a kind of base level, so we give them flour and, you know, some dried meat and whatever, and you've got to create a meal or many meals over 20 days out of what you have there, and usually you're in a cooking group of 3. So just on that level, how do you decide, using your creativity and all that, what are you going to cook that night? And then you've got to make sure that the other 2 grumpy people that might be cold or tired enjoy that. So, you know, it's really simple. You know, we're not talking big issues most of the time. We also get the opportunity for students to slow down and think through some of those bigger issues. And we have time on camp, solo times throughout many of the years, where they get to reflect on what they're doing on program, but also what might be going on at home. So, you know, there's space to look at both the simple that we can extrapolate, but also we can get quite deep into complex societal issues and things like that, that we can discuss, because we have that that time, and we've got the relationship with students. Hopefully they trust us to keep them safe and alive out there, so that's a good foundation to then continue other discussions from there. So.
Thank you. So we are coming close to the end, so I'm going to give everybody the same question, and I'm going to be mean and give it to Dr Collier first, because I suspect he's more used to being questioned without notice. So firstly, if you've got any concluding comments, and secondly, is there any particular leader? I know you did mention Nelson Mandela, but is there someone, so it could be someone you know, it could be someone from history, just someone who you think you would hold up as an ideal, obviously besides Jesus, because that's cheating, we all know that. So Dr Collier.
Final comments. Thank you very much to Dr McGonigle and to Harry Carson, John Chapman, to hear people who had something very distinctive to contribute from different roles in the school. I think is very helpful and very productive and very worthwhile. I think in a concluding remark, I'd simply say this leadership is about people and about working for their benefit. It's particularly so in school, because the people that we lead are not adults, and so they don't have the sort of agency that adults have, and therefore they're very dependent on us making good decisions and serving their interests. Leaders that are respectable, let me put it this way, the best leaders are not necessarily those who have dominant positional authority. They're people who in fact have moral authority. So look at this contrast. On the one hand, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. On the other, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. You can see the difference. Some of the latter had actually rather little positional authority and freedom, but in terms of their positive impact on human history, they are colossal figures, whereas some of those with the most power have been the most destructive. Stalin's regime, for instance, in Russia is estimated to have killed between 20 and 30 million Russians, whereas others lead entirely for the good. So in terms of respectable titans of leadership, let's say, yes, Jesus the preeminent, but certainly Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King.
Thank you. We might pop to John Chapman. John, any concluding remarks and any particular person of leadership?
Thank you for assuming I'm the second quickest on my feet, which is not the case. But,
I'm being nice to Harry.
That's good. We should be nice to Harry. It's a tough year for him. Concluding remarks, I think we need to give our students or young people the space to try leadership. Often students that I see grapple with the idea of not getting it right the first time, which is totally fine. You know, we're allowed, we're encouraged to fail because that's where we learn about our leadership style and how we modify it. So it's really great to give them the space at this school to be able to do that, but also to learn all those other things that surround good leaders in terms of what their character is like. Been kind of racking my brain to try and think of some good leaders. Obviously, again, we can throw out Jesus, but I think there's two for me. One is going back a long way, and that's Moses. He was like not the person that you would pick as a leader, and yet he is the one that God chose. So I think that's an encouragement to those of us who often don't feel like leaders, but are chosen to be them, and an encouragement to the students who don't feel like they're in the right position, may not be the best talkers or whatever. You know, he's surrounded, helped by his brother, and amazing things are done through him and by God. And the other is my grandfather, who is from Belfast, who came out to Australia and has been a Baptist minister out here for many, many years. And just seeing him as I grew up, just in the quiet way that he would care for others and be a source of wisdom for them has been quite a thing that's impacted myself as well. Not that anyone else would know him, but there you go. That's my two examples.
That's fantastic. All right, Harry, I am going to ask you now if you've got any further remarks you'd like to make about leadership or anyone who you think has been a leader that you'd aspire to be.
So my final remarks is to any parents whose children are debating about going for a leadership position when they're in year 11 and they don't think they've done enough in the middle school years. They weren't a middle school leader. Personally myself, I was a middle school leader, but I think there's a big difference between middle school and senior school leadership positions. So don't be afraid if you haven't done all the stuff in the previous years. They look at the person who are sort of now, and you don't have to have leadership roles in the school previously to get a final leadership position. And then the person who I think is a good leader, I actually had it quite early on, so I wouldn't be put on the spot that much just because I'm just studying about them. So in English, we talked about, for our Shakespeare, we did King Henry IV, Part 1. And it's about Queen Elizabeth coming to the end of her reign. And they were scared about who was going to be the next sort of monarch. So I think Queen Elizabeth is someone who was sort of the queen of the people who all the people liked because she was sort of in their individual lives. She wasn't sort of elevated herself above them. So I think that's sort of a leader that I aspire to be, is someone who can sort of be with their people and not elevate themselves above them and as an authority figure.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Harry, and thanks for joining our panel tonight. I'm going to finish Dr McGonigle, not because I thought she actually needed the most time to come up with an answer, but I did think because it is such a privilege that you could join us from overseas that I thought it would be nice for you to say the final word on leadership before we pass back to Helen, who really we should put on the spot as well, as she, of course, is our community leader as president of the P&F. So, Dr McGonigle.
Thanks, Lynn, and it's been a real pleasure to be part of this event, so thanks for having me. I started with my example leader, which was John Hume, and I'll finish with him and jump off a little bit of what John Chapman was saying, not because I now understand that he's from Belfast, which obviously raises him exponentially in my estimations now, but you talked a bit about quiet leadership. I don't know how many of you have read about the theory of quiet leadership, but it's quite prevalent now in the literature, that being humility, tenacity, a lightness of spirit. Quiet leaders generally bring humor to the job, and a vision. And I think John Hume, he came from the depths of poverty. It was by accident that he got a scholarship into a grammar school. His parents tried to dissuade him out of it, and he found himself caring so deeply about the situation in Northern Ireland and the polemics and the civil war that he simply quietly started to get involved. Bono recently in his funeral spoke a little bit about him and mentioned that it was a very understated but determined, tenacious, light voice that was able to bring around the table these very difficult, controversial voices who would not listen to each other, and he enabled them to listen, and he created a unified view. And for me, what he did in the development of a peace process and then in the disarmament of terrorist groups was nobody believed it was possible. And so he, in a very quiet way, made the impossible become possible. And I think leaders who are able to do that simply from a determined view of the future that doesn't have to be the same as the past are totally transformational. And that for me would be a clear example of leadership in this world.
That's great. Thank you. All right. So once again, thanks to our panelists. It's been a great pleasure just shooting questions off at everyone tonight. Great fun. I'm going to hand over to Helen Carson, who's of course our president of the Parents and Friends Association. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I'd really just like to say thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been fantastic. I've learned a lot. Thanks to Dr Collier. Thanks, Dr McGonigle, for joining us from those many miles away, and hopefully you'll send us over a bit of your sunshine, even though you're telling us it's too hot for you over there. Thanks also to John Chapman for staying back at school, a long way home for you to the Blue Mountains, but we do appreciate all that you've told us tonight. Very interesting, and I've also learnt about what all the years do, and my children have enjoyed every single camp they've been on and all survived. So thank you. And also to Harry, thanks for giving us an insight into your year as your school captain. I've also learnt from you, even though I ask you questions every day. So yeah, it just shows you that leadership at SACS, you don't actually have to have a position to be a leader. St Andrews does provide opportunities for every single child at the school, be it in their academics, their extracurricular, in any of the clubs, or just in every day-to-day, showing your peers, you know, what a leader you can be, from just as an example, just letting someone go ahead of you in a lift, to being the school captain. There's lots of different ways you can show that you're a true leader at St Andrews. So that just goes to show, you know, the teachers do provide these opportunities for the children, even in the smallest way. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Lynn and your amazing team, and to Matt, who's helped her. Without you, this wouldn't have actually been possible. So thank you, and thank you for making all the technical logistics run so smoothly. We really appreciate it. Just a reminder from a P&F point of view that our next meeting will be online. It's on Tuesday, the 8th of September, and we'd love you all to join us. Details will be coming to you very soon, and in our newsletter all the info will be in there, and if there's anything at all you want us to discuss in the meetings or answer, please feel free to email us through. The email is in the newsletter. So thank you once again, everybody. It's been a great evening, and we shall look forward to the next P&F Presents, which will be next term. So if anybody's got any ideas what they'd like us to speak on, please just send us through, because we want as many people as possible to join us and be interested in what we're doing. So thanks again. Hope you all have a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you online again soon.